Okay, so thank you so much for joining us in person and on Zoom. When we were planning this months ago, we didn't think this would be that popular, but a lot of things have happened. General strike is obviously something people are wanting to hear about. My name's Joel. I'm a member of UE 203 at City Market. I'm going to start with a couple housekeeping things at the top. For our folks in person, when we break out into discussion/questions, definitely use the microphone so that everyone can hear you online and here. I'll reiterate for folks online when we get there, just check that we can hear you before responding. There's some snacks back here, and there's water fountains and bathrooms around the corner. I'm excited to hear some discussion, but to put a boundary or container on today, we're neither going to present a single organization's view on a general strike, nor are we going to be able to take an exhaustive historical account of how different groups have used the term and are using them now. However, what we are hoping is to go over is some common language, especially for folks newer to the struggle, and especially some of what we can call the unobjectionable next steps for building a general strike in Vermont. In particular, for folks who are looking to what they can be doing, specifically to equip ourselves with the people power required to pull one off. There's a long history of stewardship of the weapon known as the general strike, but there's no getting around talking about last week. Minneapolis enacted the first general strike in 80 years of this country's history last week. They made history with 100,000 people coming out to the street on the 23rd and on Friday. This shutdown was the first of its scope and scale in nearly 80 years, coming after weeks of continuously expanding and increasingly violent ICE activity, including 2 heinous murders of our community members in Minneapolis. The community has risen up against the federal occupation since the beginning of ICE operations in the Twin Cities. And as ICE activity has continued to escalate, the resistance has strengthened in direct response. The public has demonstrated the tremendous power of the working class. Shut it down is not just a slogan, but a tactic that we will exercise if our communities reign under attack. People have taken to the streets in thousands since Alex Preddy's murder on Saturday, January 24th, with the call for the shutdown to extend on a national scale, building throughout the U.S. On the 30th in Vermont, in response to the Black and Somali students' call, thousands of students, especially from UVM and Champlain College, but also hundreds of high school students, even middle school students, and even some elementary school students in Burlington. At least 50 businesses closed, including large successful restaurants and grocery stores. Even City Market closed down. And more pledged 100% of their profits to migrant justice. And full shops, rank and file workers, union members left work and called out. By some estimates off the Daily Treasury Secretary statement, up to 15% of Vermonters participated to some extent in a full economic boycott for the day. This is a video from 2 days ago in Burlington when nearly 10,000 students and workers converged onto City Hall.
Chinga la migra! Chinga la migra! Fuck ICE! Fuck ICE! Fuck ICE! If today is your first day at our rally, welcome! Some of us, many of us have been coming to these for years. Some of us have been coming to these for decades. For some people,
Why do we take to the streets to protest? A protest is not just an outlet for our sadness and our rage. A protest is a threat. When Minnesota shut down last Friday, they showed us what that threat is. We threaten a general strike. We threaten workers of all types walking off the job, people boycotting shopping and school, and massive mobilizations taking place in a way that is impossible to ignore. Today, across the country, like here, many cities are holding a day of no work, no school, no shopping. And 1 week later, the strike action that began in Minneapolis has gone nationwide. The movement for a general strike will become even bigger and wider. The general strike is an idea whose time has come. With general strike, the people can defeat Trump's reactionary billionaires agenda. With a general strike, the wheels of American empire will come grinding to a halt.
Strike, strike, strike! Strike, strike, strike! I said strike, strike, strike! Strike, strike, strike! Strike, 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 strike! Strike, 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 strike!
You can hear the tail end of one of the most militant and prominent chants that day, aside from "fuck ICE," which some extremely impressive high schoolers stewarded. Strike, strike, strike. We have been agitating in the Party for Socialism and Liberation for a general strike for 25 years. Many organizations in Vermont have been for even longer. Never could anybody imagine a crowd to be so enthusiastic to strike. And outside of Vermont, in Atlanta, multiple school districts had their entire student body walk out. In Oakland, California, businesses were fully shut down. And in Minneapolis, faith leaders joined union leaders and occupied huge swaths of public and private land. Enormous demonstrations like this are a full-fledged education for our class. No strike clauses are the norm in Vermont's labor landscape and for a large portion of workers. Striking is dangerous. Dangerous because it is untenable economically. They don't have childcare because they could be fired. Strike funds, the simultaneous pressure of emergent rent strikes, tax strikes, and workers' councils all tilt the scales of the collective action problem of whether it feels possible for workers to strike. But the bottom line of that decision is an exercise in revolutionary optimism, rested in the belief that their coworkers are going to stand with them, that workers in other sectors will do the same, and that they can actually win. The general strike is an effective weapon because it unites social forces and organized labor. But shutdowns and strikes like we saw this weekend are as much of a weapon as they are a rallying cry, an expression of faith by our class in our class. So today we're interested in the nuts and bolts of making the collective action that the masses have organically called for. Amplified, of course, by the UAW's call for a 2028 general strike, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson's call for a general strike, the Chicago Teachers Union encouragement, and now especially with the successful echoes of shutdowns, boycotts, and small wildcat strikes coming out of Minneapolis, called General Strike come to life. But the impact of a general strike, its ability to successfully educate workers of their power, and the ability to actually bring it to life is predicated not only on the spontaneous anger and willingness of the masses to risk their material position, but also on how organized we are. Organizations, particularly unions and militant fighting organizations like the party, act as a collective memory for the struggle to store this great educational moment where workers realize how they are against the billionaire class, realize how they are aligned they are against the billionaire class. They are also able to coordinate the stewardship of the general strike in terms of concretizing the demands and actionable coordination of withholding both productive and purchasing power of the people. While it's not possible for a union or organization to shot call a general strike, transforming the public swell around particular flashpoints of activity is exactly what organized workers are capable of. For some of us nerds, labor history is fascinating and love the deep dive, and for others, have us just want to throw over my comrade to Drew to talk a little bit about his experience in a union and some history to ground us in this discussion.
Thank you all for being here and online. Hope so. I'll talk really close. But I'll speak louder if that's helpful. Cool.
No, not sound. I think they meant video.
So I'm here to give a little bit of history and context about one of the largest labor unions in the state, the Vermont State Employee Association, or the VSEA. Basically to just kind of give a little context as why an organization that size, that old, is largely absent from the movement right now. So there's a lot. I, in general, would like to just be speaking from bullet points, but since there is so much information, I'll be doing a lot of reading. But yeah, my name is Drew Schatzer. I'm here to talk about the VSEA's historic challenges and successes as one of the largest unions in the state. The VSEA is an independent, member-controlled union made up of nearly 6,000 members, with the goal, their main mission statement, which I think kind of we'll come back around to, is improving the wages, benefits, and working conditions of Vermont state employees. And that's about it. That's really all they claim to do. So there's about 15 full-time staff members who work at VSEA headquarters, but those are not state employees, but employees of the VSEA. The rest of the union structure, though, is made up of state employees who serve their union beyond the scope of their 9-to-5 jobs. I've been in the union for 3 years now and was recently nominated to join the VSEA Council, which is the legislative body of our union. It's made up of about 150 members and is meant to bring diversity from the many different job types that make up the bargaining units. We're each elected by our local chapters, which there's 14 of, and we meet quarterly, and we're designed to guide the VSEA in their priorities and actions. We also have the power to override the Board of Trustees. Now, the Board of Trustees manages the operations of the VSEA, considering proposals and suggestions from staff, council, members, the bargaining units. They determine the organization's future direction, aims, goals, and priorities. And they're responsible for fiscal oversight, policy development, and the organization's overall management. And we elect those members every 3 years. The VSEA was founded in 1944, so we're turning 82 this year. We were founded with the strong support of, surprisingly, a Republican governor, William Wills. And then over the next decade from their formation, they worked hard to classify the various job titles and advocate for fair compensation. They established their 14 local chapters and started introducing bills at the State House. In the beginning, they won a group insurance plan and a coffee break, early successes. By the mid-1950s, they'd adopted articles of association and bylaws. Social Security had become integrated into the state's retirement system, and they successfully lobbied to reduce their work week from 60 hours to 40 hours with no loss in pay. In the 60s, collective bargaining and new state labor relations board were established, but at the cost of a no strike clause in the Labor Relations Act, meaning it's state statute. It's not just in our contract, but for state workers, it's in our state law that we have a no strike clause during the lifetime of our contract. And each contract is 2 years. So unless like a contract doesn't get renewed, we can't strike basically. Unless, there's some examples of egregious, things done by the employer themselves. So if there's very dangerous, unsafe work conditions or, things like that, then we could strike legally. But other than that, we can't strike in solidarity. We can't acknowledge another organization's picket line, so very crippled there, but circling back. Towards the end of the century, the VSEA shifted its focus to day-to-day workplace concerns like ergonomic standards, indoor air quality, asbestos abatement, employee child care, and the fight for affordable and even universal health care. You guys remember that when Vermont was trying to do that? A second contract negotiation resulted in impasse. The first one was in the 60s. That led to fact-finding, but they eventually were able to ratify. In 91, the VSEA Council worked to remove the no strike clause, but was ultimately defeated. But they were able to end the state's ability to hire temporary workers to circumvent hiring classified employees to fill positions covered under the bargaining unit. In 98, the VSEA joined the fight for pay equity for women. They also were able to close many sick buildings, and employees were relocated over the next 20 years. They did that. In the 2000s, they began a campaign to guarantee livable wages for state employees. From 2001 to 2002, there were fight back rallies that were held at the State House protesting service and position cuts. They also began a political campaign stating, "Politics is union business." And in 2006, they participated in a joint Union Leadership Academy program, bringing together union activists from Vermont, Maine, and New Hampshire. And throughout that first decade of the 2000s, they were constantly pushing back against cuts to positions and services. Those were the Bush years, ending with the recession. In 2010, after the recession, state employees were asked to take a 3% pay cut to help balance the budget. Because of that, the fallout from the financial collapse. Luckily, this was eventually restored in the 2012 contract negotiations. But in 2011, Vermont state employees were able to participate in solidarity actions to support Wisconsin and New Hampshire state employees who were at war with their far-right administrations. Scott Walker in Wisconsin, if you remember that, he was doing terrible things to state workers. The Fight Back campaign was resurrected in 2015 to combat more proposed cuts to services and positions. They also led the fight in workplace safety reforms after a state employee, Laura Sobel, was tragically killed while leaving work. In 2016, the state admin proposed a no cost of living raise during contract negotiations, and impasse was declared for a third time, leading to mediation and fact-finding. The state admin had presented limited, cherry-picked, and mostly irrelevant data to private sector pay in comparable occupations in an attempt to justify their proposal, but the VSEA found that Vermont state employees were paid nearly 13 to 40% less than workers in comparable occupations. But that main argument really comes down to whether state workers' pay should be decreased or taxes increased to balance the state budget. In that case, fact finders found a compromise between the 4% proposal by the VSEA and the 0% proposal by the state and settled at 2%. So they did get a raise. They also got a 50-cent an hour pay increase for game warden weekend work and a few other gains related to grievance procedures and step increases. Any of you in unions know that's every little bit counts. Everything's a battle. But in general, this timeline shows a consistent pattern of advocacy for state employees' wages, benefits, and working conditions. But it also shows us where concessions were made that have limited our ability to be truly participatory in the labor movement and the fight for workers' rights. There are those of us now in the VSEA that want to see a return to the solidarity actions that we participated in alongside Wisconsin and New Hampshire in 2011. And we're working to abolish the no strike clause again, but it's enshrined in statute. So it's a lot of work. In general, from my own experience being in these union meetings, there are more folks like me that are speaking up. I'm glad I'm not the only one trying to rattle cages, but we still are the minority. A lot of people, like Joel mentioned, are afraid of losing our job. When I've just brought up, if you remember the return to office thing that came out a couple months ago, there's a lot of people unhappy. But when we'd be in our union meetings talking about stopping labor, it was just crickets. And in fact, the VSEA would say we're not allowed to talk about that, So anyway, a lot of Vermont unions find themselves in similar binds where a no strike clause ties their hands. And in general, our large unions like the Vermont NEA, National Education Association, the Vermont Federation of Nurses and Health Professionals, the Teamsters, and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the IBEW. They have their hands full just securing basic economic rights. The history of labor power's decline in Vermont is one which follows the strengthening of powerful monopolies and billionaires and has been contending with the stealing of resources en masse by the ownership class, while the workers are just tirelessly working to secure a piece of the pie. So I'm going to pause for a second and kind of now shift my focus to more of the history of the general strike in the U.S. labor movement. And Vivon's going to pick up on some of that too. So the practice of general strikes has long been an integral part of the development of U.S. politics and class relations since before even the founding of the nation. And it was really important to end chattel slavery. It's part of our lifeblood. So much can be learned from the strikes of the past. In dire times of rampant inequality, the strike has been a steadfast tool of the people. However, not all instances of striking have been equally successful. In the early 1870s, banks were spiraling downwards. The stock market crash in Europe, alongside the credit mobilier scandal, plummeted railroad stocks. Dozens of railroad companies went bankrupt, and over 100 banks fell in what is now known as the Panic of 1873. As the country entered the Long Depression, unemployment and prices rose as pay was cut, and thousands of rail workers were laid off and left destitute. By 1876, employment was up to 14%, and wages were down by 45%. Unionized workers, such as those at the Baltimore and Ohio Rail, argued the cuts, but disorganization among union members hindered their efforts. Eventually, the fever hit its zenith, and in mid-July, workers in Maryland and West Virginia went on an impromptu strike. They refused the passage of any rail car until the pay cuts were revoked for a total of 52 days, eventually spreading across 6 states: Maryland, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, Illinois, and Missouri. Governors called in state and federal troops to snuff out the strike, resulting in violent clashes and rioting in places like Baltimore and Pittsburgh. Dozens of workers were killed by federal troops. In Baltimore, 10 people were killed by the Maryland National Guard, while in Pittsburgh, at least 26 were reported dead. In the city of Reading, Pennsylvania, 16 citizens were shot in what is now known as the Reading Massacre. And over 100 people total are estimated to have died, and 1,000 to have been imprisoned. Eventually, the strike was strangled into submission by governmental and unofficial militias like the Pinkertons. But despite the efforts and bloodshed that the strike resulted in, workers saw little real improvement to their conditions. Wages were not rolled back as demanded, and many organizers and sympathizers were imprisoned. No governmental action was taken on behalf of the workers' well-being. Despite being around 100,000 people strong at its peak and shutting down half of the U.S. railroad operations at one point, the lack of centralized organization of the strikers meant that it could not effectively pose an axis of resistance against the ruling class interests. It's clear from the example of the 1877 railroad strike that numbers are not enough to see demands met. The people must be coordinated with a common goal in mind and a willingness to set themselves aside for the good of the group. A similar yet opposite outcome was experienced in 1946 during the Oakland General Strike, about 70 years later. It took place just after World War II, and the tensions of the war put laborers into a peculiar situation. Collectively focused on the defeat of European and Japanese imperial projects abroad, many labor organizations, such as the American Federation of Labor, or the AFL, and the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, entered no-strike pacts with employers. For unions that came up strong in the 40s and 50s, such as my own, this became the norm. And there is, I was just trying to do a little more research on the pros and cons of no-strike clauses. Why would anyone do something like that to themselves, right? And I guess it was often coupled with no lockout clauses, meaning neither side. The employers couldn't just shut down operations, but the employees couldn't either. It was a way to kind of guarantee stability. But as we'll see, I don't think anyone's better off because of that compromise. But in the Oakland area, union membership was a mixed bag among retail workers. Some workers found success in unionizing, and those who didn't manage to unionize, however, often faced deplorable working conditions. On top of lower pay and worse hours, non-unionized stores employed a ready room system. Employees would literally show up to work only to sit in the ready room. If the store manager decided that they were needed on the floor, they would get to go out and work. Otherwise, they would just sit there unpaid for their entire shift. Naturally, workers weren't willing to tolerate this system for long, and a few hundred workers went on strike for better wages and working conditions. A coalition of these retail employees feared a domino effect. The employers feared a domino effect and cracked down on the then small strike. And on December 1st of that year, about a month into the strike, they ordered 250 police to clear picketers with support from the city's government, beating up the working women, setting up machine guns, and towing cars. The efforts of strikers and governmental response only added fuel to the fire. Members of the Teamster National Union, in particular, were militantly prepared to defend striking retail workers, to grow the numbers of picketers outside the department stores. The AFL called for a secondary strike, with over 100,000 AFL members of several industries walking off the job in Oakland and the surrounding area. The strike kept growing until nearly the entirety of Oakland was shut down. At its peak, crowds reached up to 35,000 people in downtown Oakland. Despite the growing numbers, many labor leaders in the AFL and Teamsters did not condone the tactics and aggravation on display. 2 days into the general strike, 142 AFL unions voted to end the strike, arguing that the appointment of a new city manager was going to be sufficient to the demands of the strikers. Even with the general strike called off, though, the strike died out hard. Virtually none of the demands of the original retail strikers were met, and so they continued the strike for several months among dwindling picketers. That new city manager had negotiated peace talks between labor organizations and the Retail Merchant Association and ensured that police would not be further used to protect the interests of strikebreakers. However, this promise was broken very shortly after labor leaders voted to call off the strike, prompting a workers' ban on Retail Merchant Association construction projects. Ultimately, the ending of this strike can be traced to a nationwide legislative effort conducted by a wide array of corporations. The Retail Merchants Association received a court injunction that limited pickets to 5 per store entrance, curtailing the remaining picketers. And at the same time, a federal injunction was used to break a 400,000 strong walk-off of United Mine Workers. And Congress proposed hundreds of bills to limit the powers of workers and break up unions. Faced with this new form of legal curbing, labor organizations were forced or compelled to seek reformation and cooperation with bourgeois powers. The AFL turned primarily towards lobbying, and the communist faction of the CIO began to seek cooperation with New Deal electoral politicians. This history is critical to analyze because if we want to know how to model a winning strike in Vermont, it'll be the key lessons from our class's failures. I'm going to pass it off now to Vivon to speak to us or finish up so we can move on to the discussion, because I'm curious what everyone else wants to talk about. So thank you.
Hey, y'all. Okay. Audio's good? Okay. Just wanted to give a sort of reframing of our goal here today, which is to talk a little bit about Vermont's in our discussion, Vermont specific conditions, especially with respect to building a general strike. And to do that is an analysis of a lot of different things, like analysis of labor as we're sort of looking at, but also an analysis of social forces. But I think that kind of very importantly, beyond analysis, you know what I'm going to say, maybe if you've been to a rally before, is that the way that for unorganized forces to get involved in building a general strike is to get organized. Your organization will provide you enormous guidance, whether it's your union, your workplace, your coworkers, through the democratic process of being able to work towards your economic goals. You know, ultimately, that's the best way. But that's not a satisfying answer. And sometimes people need to be able to put one foot in front of the other. So the question is now, for the Vermonter, the analytical category of the Vermonter, what is in front of them? What can we put in front of them as a way for them to build power, build people power, and build towards this general strike in a meaningful way? And I think that for a lot of folks, there are some obvious questions at hand and obvious different models that different organizations have. There's a very prefigurative model, which would suggest, for example, what's missing from building a general strike. For example, we don't have sufficient mutual aid networks. We don't have childcare. We don't have a strike fund. We don't have sufficient food sovereignty to throw a general strike. If, you know, the shutdown that we pulled off on Friday, which was an incredible effort, but if that were to be able to continue for long enough for us to actually demand ICE out, then we would exhaust our class, and our class would be petered out, right? So the question is, should we be building this network? Is that what we're asking people to do? Is people, you know, join up with People's Kitchen, find another way to make food sovereignty a possibility for the working class? I'm not saying no to that. That is a great idea, and I think ultimately my TLDR for possibly the entire discussion will be that you should do something. If you're in this room, you're probably already doing something. If you're in the Zoom, I hope you're doing something. But there's no harm in doing something. Building towards a general strike is building towards organizing, and building towards organizing is building towards building. But all that to say is, we're looking for some specific sort of forays for people to be able to access the ability to build towards general strike. And if not, you know, trying to seize food sovereignty now, what else is available? And one thing I wanted to put forward is, you know, I'm a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. We're a big fan of a sort of dual power model, wherein the popularization of worker power will allow for the conditions and the general strikes that Drew was talking about earlier for workers to be able to organically develop some of those systems themselves. That is to say, we're not at the stage of popularity of the general strike where we need to stop talking about the general strike. We still need to build the popularity amongst our class and build consensus within our class. And in order to do that, we need to bring people in, and we need to bring people who are in, get them organized. So Vermont has a lot of sort of specific characteristics with regards to some of these things. For example, I'll take a cheap example. Childcare is brought up as something that isn't required in order to have a sustained general strike. We have, I mean, with the greatest respect to our lovely state, a large number of older people. We have the childcare sort of spelled out for us. It would be extremely easy for Vermont to adapt to the conditions of a general strike, because the proportion of working parents to the proportion of empty nesters is really high. We also, for example, have an enormously organized, disproportionately organized, I'll add, migrant farm worker population. Food sovereignty is a question which is like, you know, how do we get there? And the answer is really, migrant justice has already done it. And so, like, a lot of times when we're talking about a general strike, we're talking about the imagination of a new system and a new weapon that the working class doesn't have access to right now in this moment. But that doesn't mean that the organization up until this point is not usable. And the fact of the matter is that, like, and I hope that in discussion we can touch on it, but we have about another hour or so it's probably not as exhaustively as we want. Will we be able to talk about how to find those networks and bring them forward. So specifically talking about migrant justice's ability to promote food sovereignty, if you take sort of any organic union of workers who are fighting for their own interests, in this case, undocumented farm workers, their ability to be able to organize is predicated on their ability to be able to have material connection to their surplus. In this case, the achievement of migrant justice to be able to give farm workers their rights is also the achievement of the preconditions for general strike. In that way, migrant justice is an enormously important organization for us to support. It's a very easy organization for us to support, and it's probably an unobjectionable organization for us to support. So in that way, I think for a lot of folks who are looking for like, well, what do I do now? Or like, I'm trying to get organized. I'm kind of talking in my workplace, and like people aren't super enthused, but like this general strike thing, that was electric, right? Friday, that's 10,000 people. That can't just be like nothing, right? Surely there's something I can do right now. And the answer is absolutely yes. But it's not a separate question from getting organized. There's just a lot of kinds of it. And so I'm going to actually, I think I want to pass off to make sure we have time for a full-fledged discussion, but there's definitely more to say. What I'm hoping that people are able to bring is sort of their direct experiences of existing in this time, in this electric time, in which there is a forefront against ICE. Industrial Avenue, Harvest Lane, the sort of powerful social media stalker sites of ICE are literal buildings, one of which is a building which has staff which is entering in a few months to start doing said social media stalking. That is a enormously tangible goal, which is one of the things that a general strike requires in order to be successful, as seen with sort of the failure of the 1877 railroad strike. I say failure, enormous success of the 1877 railroad strike, but the fizzling out of it. Those tangible goals are presented very plainly to us. And if you look at the fuck ICE and the strikes being said next to each other, there's kind of a pathway that's illuminated for sort of general people. And for that reason, I think that like a lot of people sharing your experiences on what it's like to be able to talk to your parents or talk to your coworkers about issues like ICE, about issues like taking power, about issues like defeating capitalism. Those are themselves not feeling like it's a building block to be standing up on a staircase walking towards a general strike, but they are. That is what is required in order to build one. So I'm going to pass it off back to Joel to start our Q&A. But I definitely think that and I think there's probably some energy in the audience to say something. So I'm going to take it.
Thanks so much, Vivan. I think we're ready to open up for some discussion. So what we're going to do is use a stack method. So for in person, it's important to use the microphone so that folks online can hear us. And for folks online, it's helpful for folks to voice their concerns. If folks have a question on Zoom, you can drop a 1 for a question, and you can drop a 2 if you have a direct response to a question or discussion that someone started. Let's remember, of course, our objective is to empower us all, especially those of us coming to this space who are not part of an organized movement, and to be civil and comradely with each other. Oh, sure. Sure. Will, go ahead.
Hey everyone, thanks for this. First, I'll just say, Vivan, it is a miracle you still have a voice. That's really impressive. Great to see all the action on Friday. My question, I guess, is in response to some of what we heard from the VSEA speaker. I'm a former VSEA rank and filer at the health department, where I had lots of coworkers who maybe felt a little bit more politically driven and motivated than, what we were seeing from our more conservative union leadership. And I know that's still the case. So I'm interested in your thoughts on how we're building toward this with a rank and file strategy, where maybe we're supporting those in not union leadership positions, but working rank and file jobs and connecting with their peers and kind of capturing some of the social energy we're seeing and bringing it into the workplace.
Great question. So I'm still pretty new to the inner workings of the union. So I'm just going to kind of go off of what my strategy is, and hopefully it's universal. But I know, for example, like one of the reasons I was recently nominated to join the council was because our chapter had like 4 vacant seats. So I didn't even have to like do much work. I just, okay, So going to local chapter meetings, seeing if there is a place for you to become more involved. If you're already involved, like it sounds like you are, try to get elected to the board of trustees, because they do have more control over the direction of the union. But I still am not working in person. I was able to submit accommodation requests where I'm still able to continue teleworking, but I imagine a lot of this conversation could be happening more at our water cooler talks, at our lunch breaks. That's one of the things I am looking forward to about returning to office, is to try to kind of get a pulse of what the will of the average employee is right now. But in these meetings, there's usually a handful of other agitators, who when given the chance to speak up during like an open comment period, or saying we need to be doing more and standing with our brothers and sisters in the labor movement and the migrant community. And so yeah, I'm still exploring how we're gonna overturn like our no strike clause, if it's a matter of getting Vermont legislators to take that out of our Labor Act. But yeah, in general, try not to use your work email for this kind of communication. Use personal emails, and just be careful when you're on the clock with what you say and do. So like on Friday, I used personal time off, but I put in my away message like that I'm standing in solidarity with the people of Minnesota, so that anyone that emailed me while I was gone would know that's why I'm not working. And I was a little worried about pushback, but I haven't heard anything. No news is good news. But I think as long as I'm not on the clock or saying that I'm speaking for the VSEA, raising awareness is what's going to turn the tide, I think. Speaking of turning the tide, I was really impressed to hear about the elders in Williston a couple weeks ago now that sat in at the new office building that ICE wants to turn into a spy center, right? And the landlord came and yelled in their faces and told them to get out, and he was going to have them all arrested and trespassed. And the Williston police showed up and said, you know what, we're not going to brutalize these people. We're not going to arrest these people. They're just practicing their First Amendment right. And I imagine it's because they really weren't doing anything to harm anyone or disrupt the actual operations, but they were raising awareness. And so I think if the Williston police were able to kind of see that, that's me seeing the tide turning, and we're going to gain more and more support. So do what you can on the clock, but I know my local chapter, we had enough conversation at our meeting last week that we want to start a Google group to just kind of how we can all talk about what we're doing in the labor movement beyond just the VSEA stuff, our chapter meetings and our council work. So discuss that with your local chapter. If there's other people like you that want to do more, and maybe kind of form a little side branch or a committee that talks about, well, I was at this labor meeting last week, and this is what's going on in my town or my county. But yeah, who's next?
You'll go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me online? Okay, yeah. Theo, he, him, Wieland, with the Democratic Socialists of America. Yeah, I guess one of the questions I have is how can the third No Kings rally be used as best as possible to kind of contribute to the development of a general strike in America, whether it becomes a strike school or we're running around with clipboards. But what are things that have been done in the past, and what might be something more that could be done for No Kings 3?
I think we can grab like a couple questions also if folks want to be sort of open discussion. I said, was there someone who had a hand raised here? Yeah.
And Matt Guile, the political action chair for Winooski Education Association. This is kind of connected to what Theo was just asking. I've been thinking about what are some, for those of us who are in unions that do have no strike clauses, what are some actions and events and things that we can do to sort of build that capacity and awareness. So one of the things we've been doing is we've been doing small rallies that are outside of contracted hours. We call them walk-in events. We did one again in solidarity with Minnesota. But again, thinking how we can sort of build that organizing capacity. I'm just wondering if there are any thoughts in VSEA, if there's anything like that. Again, we're always looking for more ideas. Yeah, thank you.
I think it was a draw, but let's start by it.
I'm Tristan. I'm a member of Staff United at UVM. And I mean, I think we're in a really weird moment because on the one hand, our biggest unions in the state, many of them either can't strike or have really significant restrictions on them from striking. And the same is true nationally. And at the same time, things will move very, very quickly, right? Like Minneapolis, the idea of a general strike probably 2 weeks before it happened was not something anybody would have said like, yeah, that could totally happen. And it wasn't the kind of thing that we would think of as a traditional general strike. It was the beginnings of it, and it had tremendous impact, but it wasn't, I think when we're talking about like historically what a general strike should look like and what it's going to take, that was the beginning of it. But we need to think about like, what would it actually mean for millions of workers to mobilize and actually go on strike in the ways that you talked about historically. And what I guess I can't get my head around in this moment is like, it's actually going to require illegal strikes. It's going to require tremendous solidarity, tremendous levels of organization, putting together the kinds of funds that are going to help workers out if they do go out on illegal strikes. But that doesn't grow overnight. And so I think the point about like, what are we doing to build real power and to make ourselves strike ready right now is really, really important, but it has to be with the eye towards actually breaking the law. That's where our unions came from in the first place. And I think about like I think Matt in the last meeting we were at raised the example recently of teachers in Massachusetts. And then there were also the red state strikes. I think about like when I lived in New York City, the transit workers went on strike and they were literally fined millions of dollars. Their leadership was put in jail. But solidarity across unions is what can give you the ability to do that, and solidarity from our broader community. So I don't feel like there's we can't necessarily lay out the steps right here for what it's going to take to get from here to an actual, like the kind of powerful general strikes that it will take to stop ICE and to stop Trump. But it really does come down to what we can do day to day to build like the beginnings of militancy, the beginnings of real solidarity in our unions and between unions. There aren't shortcuts, I guess is what I mean. But at the same time, like I feel like there's more of a promise than there has been in generations that this is something our side can do.
Thanks. Carl Entmeyer, I was a delegate at the 2020 AFL-CIO Vermont State Convention, where we voted to authorize the board to call for a general strike in Vermont if Trump lost the 2020 election and committed shenanigans. And that created a lot of controversy. And the National AFL-CIO was not happy with that. But we had this tool that we had in mind, and we said, here are the conditions under which we want this tool to be used, and that was to be a call not only to unionized workers but to the entire workforce in Vermont, go on a general strike. And we we hadn't done any organizing like this around it. So I'm really glad to see these conversations going on right here. So we had a reason to use the tool, but we weren't prepared to use it. We didn't have the organization for it. You guys are organizing around this tool. You're talking about a general strike. Could you talk some about the conditions for deploying it? Is it against oligarchs? Is it against people who are trying to subvert the peaceful transition of power? Is it against terrorists, mass terrorists operating on our streets? What do you think? I'm curious.
Hey, I think get Brett one.
Okay, from Leo, we have what might a general strike look like for people in helping professions like social workers, healthcare workers, mental health workers, educators, or those for whom it would be difficult to meet their basic needs without a job, or for whom it would be difficult to get another job if they were to be penalized? Great question.
And I'm going to encourage folks to also, in your stack, feel free to discuss anything that's been discussed. This is a discussion rather than a Q&A, but I'm happy to talk a little bit about some of this. As I think you can you remember your name, Tristan. Excellent. I think that's a pretty key question. And to merge it with just the question that was asked on the Zoom is, I'm a social worker. I work at the Howard Center Needle Exchange. We're closing down 5 months because the board was afraid of the pressure. And that will have an enormous impact on folks. And knowing, sort of projecting for that has kind of shown us, as we were prepared for Friday and deciding whether we would close for the day and have unhoused folks not have a place to get warm, or decide, are we going to pare back services, et cetera, led to these like incredibly powerful calculations and thoughts. And the truth is that the members of shops and the members of the places that people work know the answer automatically. We knew the answer was that we're going to do no paperwork, we're going to no admin, we're going to not wear no uniform, no stamp. That might be the case for EMTs. That might be the case for nurses, healthcare professionals, et cetera. I don't know is the answer. Nobody should know. But ultimately, the protections that we have in this sort of really terrible interim place we're in history right now, where we're on the precipice of we're certainly on the precipice of something massive. The general strike in Minneapolis can't be ignored, and nor can we really, in good conscience, call it a general strike for much longer when it was a day of single days of action. But what we're in that liminal space, the sort of the creativity of our class, I think, shines, and the adaptation to the sort of conditions of people's work becomes, I think, extremely critical, because it's the bridge that lets people move from solidarity to action. Like specifically, I guess also to answer some of what Matt was saying as well, is that I feel, in talking with a lot of sort of the social work caucus of individuals who are very, very sympathetic to ICE, Palestine, et cetera, especially when the dock workers went on strike. There was the talk of a lot of solidarity strikes from social work contingents. And the answer was a huge amount of uncertainty whether there would be sufficient public support to develop an immediate rapid strike fund or immediate rapid job replacement. That sort of enormous uncertainty is what froze the conversation, is what froze the organizing. And so, I'm not positing an answer that like what we need to do is crowdfund a general strike fund that is outside of the confines of individual shops or individual sectors. But I'm also saying that like the sort of like action capacity of an individual to engage in this like real like chicken game collection action problem of how to commit materially is predicated on more than just like the immediate, like, is there a strike fund set up? It's also like, is 5051, is the, is the next No King's Day going to feature worker power? And if it does, is that going to build the confidence of people to support when the time comes. So I see more stacks. I think it would be good to field up some of this. How many questions are on the Zoom? 5. Okay. I think we'll let it go chaotic. Do you want to read some and then we'll pass the mic into the year?
Okay, so just reading some more questions on Zoom. I believe. Okay, sorry, making sure I got the right one next. Next one, I think Patrick. What'd you say? Okay, great. Comments. I'm seeing a potential role for Mayday Strong to support some of these rank and file power building opportunities, not limited to just strike action. Angelica says, can the union workers simply work slow, go to work, but not in a way that produces profit as a form supporting the strike? Someone is.
Can you go one step louder, Alyssa?
Oh yeah, sorry. Asking for links for the videos of the Burlington protests. Super powerful. It should be shared. Thank you. And next question or comment. I work for a small maple syrup business in the winter and feel often that if I striked, it would only hurt people in my community and my coworkers. Not a direct question, but looking for ways around this conundrum. Should I continue? Okay. Okay. We're going to pause for a second.
This one. Here. You got it?
Okay, I have a few things to say. Ellen K, UVM Staff United. We need to democratize our unions. So if you're in a union where you have to do sort of quiet gathering of people, your union needs to be democratized. Everybody should be able to watch their own contract negotiations, attend them. Everybody should know what's in that contract. If you don't, there's work to be done there in your union. As for striking, when hospital workers strike, when teachers strike, the most successful strikes are the ones where the community is behind those workers, right? And that those of us who work directly with students, patients, and other constituencies can make those relationships. They know you. They know that you're committed to them, so that when you do a job action, it's not too many steps to bring them in, right? And as for the next No Kings rally, given a lot of thought to this, I don't understand why we gather people at rallies who are activists, who are coming out to do a thing, and then we talk at them. We're the ones doing the work. So how can we use those moments where we actually gather people differently? So how can we, instead of having, especially political talking heads talking at us, they're not doing that work, we are. So is there a way to gather people on the grounds, wherever we are? So get in your areas, either affinities, the kind of work you do, or the places you live, and figure out who's there. Get each other's contact information. From the stage, you can get migrant justice information to everybody to make sure they're all on the rapid response. Like, let's use those times to actually do something. Because I'm personally not interested in going to another rally where people speak at me. We're not using our power. And to the person who talked about striking, nobody strikes alone. Unions are about us, not I, right? That's the power that we have, is that we act together and we act to protect each other and we fight. I fight for your situation and you fight for mine and we do it together. So it's not a separate thing. And there's one other thing. I do believe that the strikes have to be a like, Friday worked really well at UVM we're talking a lot, we always say it's a student walkout. It was also a faculty and staff walkout. We did it different ways. We didn't do it as the union told everybody walk out, we're on strike. We did it a little more creatively and quietly than that. And also UVM, higher ed workers at UVM and the Vermont State Colleges are carved out similarly to the VSEA We're not protected at all for striking. We are prohibited supposedly from striking in the state statutes. There's a bill in the Senate. I hope you all will support that. We want that lifted off of our necks so that we can coordinate things like somebody just said, slowdowns, sick outs. We can't coordinate those now without huge risks to our entire union, right? So that doesn't make any sense to me. Sorry, there's one other thing. It has to, Friday. Because everybody was doing this outside of our unions, it helped our workers be able to walk out and join this thing, right? It wasn't, hey, you unions, you start this and the rest of us will come along. There were shops closing downtown. There were organizations. There were schools walking out. There was, hey, everybody, everybody's doing this. You're safer in numbers. So it's a kind of dialectic thing. It's not one or the other. And unions need huge numbers of people, 90%, to have an official strike. There's a mechanism there. So it's not just me as a leader think it's a good idea, so I'm going to call a strike of our union. Because without all of our members all together doing this, we got no power. That's not power. That's just somebody with a title thinking that they have power personally.
Yeah, I would love to. I'm Cameron, UVM Staff United. We have 4 board members of UVM Staff United here, and I want to talk a little bit about what's working in Minneapolis and what worked for our union on Friday. Is that it was a combination of the decentralization that was protective for us, right? Like if our board members, if like we say our union is going on strike, that is like a whole legal thing that we're not there yet, right? And we can't be there yet. But like when I go and talk to my supervisor and say, well, the union isn't calling this action officially, but we're joining, like as members, we're joining this thing that's happening. That was protective for us. And that was something I was able to say to my supervisor. And then, so it's protective decentralization, right? And then pair that with really high level, efficient organization and expertise, right? Like our AFT field rep was able to text me like suggestive language for how people can talk to their supervisors. And then I had people coming up to my desk and emailing me to be like, what do I say to my supervisor? And I was able to be like, okay, well, we have this thing. So we have the decentralization with the expertise, and we have the network to disseminate it because we have a whole committee that's dedicated to writing this newsletter where we put this together and get it out every week. And so that's the infrastructure that we need to be building. But we couldn't have done that if the call hadn't come from outside the house, right? To be, come do this. And it's not going to be blamed on you to go do this.
And if you want to see the statement that our union made about the strike, go to our Instagram. And Cameron did a lot of that work. So
yes. And then UVM Staff United is our Instagram. And then a third thing I want to say is that the other reason that I think it worked for us on Friday so well, and we were able to get such good turnout to Waterman from our staff union, is because it was so widely held and deeply felt in our community. The fuck ICE mentality. Like when I've heard multiple stories of like my coworkers, like Tristan has a good story about a supervisor essentially saying like, yeah, we'll rework things, go. Right. Like this is something that the supervisor, our manager level, like they watch the news too. They think that shit sucks too. Right. And so like having it be something that is so commonly felt in society lends like basing it in there, basing the action in something that is even sympathetic to that level. Like I know there are people that came out that wouldn't have gone if their supervisors hadn't given them the okay, because it's too scary, right? And we're too early. But like having the connection be really tightly made there with something where, okay, there we are all in this together across those divides. Yeah. All right. Who was?
I'll just do a quick kind of off of what you were saying. Like, I was thinking of one thing, and it also ties in with the No Kings 3. Maybe one way that we could get a better audience, like you said, not just preaching to the choir, but what if we all committed to like getting our reps at these things? You know, like people always say, like, where's Bernie when we're having a rally? But not even just our federal reps, but like I live in South Burlington and I do not feel represented by my city council at all. They're working against us to get like the apartheid-free community pledge on our town ballot. I'm not really in a place where I can run for city council at the moment. I got a small kid and work 2 jobs, and even just attending the meetings, it's too much. But what if we as community members like got together and put this pressure on our reps that need to hear this stuff to say, we want you at this rally, like kind of make them RSVP. If they're not going to go, like tell us you're not going to go and tell us why you're not going to go, no, to listen, like to be there to hear this stuff. Cause you're right. Like the people who are woke, who know this stuff are already there. Now I do see value in providing greater context. A lot of people show up for maybe one reason and then get to hear a half dozen or a dozen other people talk about why they are there. And then it, strengthens the movement. But anyway, that was just one thought that popped into my head when you said, how else can we make these rallies more effective? Is maybe we can get our reps there. I also, was thinking about, again, the return to office. When I was talking to my union members about what we could do, I didn't say we should all withhold labor. What I said is we should all just continue business as usual, keep teleworking, and basically make them fire all of us. If enough of us do that, they're not going to fire half of their workforce. And that's when I was told we can't even have this conversation. So that's the kind of stuff that I need to learn more about is without saying we're going to go on strike, but like, I'm just going to keep giving my 110% like I've always given it. And if you don't like it, you can fire me, but getting half the organization to say that at the same time, So anyway,
before you start, we've got about 11 minutes left for discussion. So if folks have like particular wrap-up points, then Joel, I think I'll just pass back to you to close us out. I just wanted, as a little note, is that like there's like 2 separate conversations to have right now, which is like there are people who have been on the ground organizing in Vermont for like decades and centuries around the idea of striking, and then there's people who have found this brilliantly sexy idea and have entered into the fray. And those people, I think, it's very, very easy to imagine that these talking points that we spew at each other are known by the public. But out of those 10,000 people, how many have heard it before? How many people are brand new to the streets? And I think it's important to just sort of remember, especially in this discussion, that at the end of the day, if someone walks out of this, out of a space like this, I think what's enormously valuable beyond, I think, the thing that's always valuable, which is framing, which is the ability to like pieces and ability to think about things later, is something to do. And I think that like one analysis that has been sitting with me that somebody gave recently is that the Montgomery bus boycott is a very similar moment to now in terms of what kind of strike are we really even talking about. And civil rights strikes are like, I think, a little bit more analogous to this ICE moment. It's a pretty unique demand that we're talking about, or that people are not talking about in specific enough terms. But the Montgomery bus boycott, the features of it and the ways in which people were able to sort of organically and very, very rapidly provide alternate transportation and alternate workplace workspace were not preordained, but they also didn't come out of nowhere. That came from organized caucuses of solidarity civil rights activists, a lot of them white civil rights activists who were prepared to co-strike, basically. And that was their version of it, was instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to carpool you to work. And so all that to say is that like Vermont has a strong mutual aid culture. That there's no doubt about it. Vermont is maybe even a leader in that. And it would be foolish not to rely, to sort of lean on that gas pedal. So for folks who are I think completely uninvolved and maybe just like hearing the term general strike, I just wanted to reiterate, and I'm saying it as if someone else said it, but thing that person said before, which was me, which is there's no better solution than to get organized, because the conversations that I think that some people have brought up here are conversations that only really make sense in an organized movement with some coordinated movement, like especially the alliance between different unions to be able to support each other. Again, especially like with what I'm thinking about of the Palestine dock workers. It's impossible to manufacture unless those conversations happen internally and until there's a critical mass of people in those. And the only way for those to happen is for those people to join that conversation. But let's maybe finish at the stack online.
Okay, yep. Okay, so a couple more questions on Stack. Sorry, I don't know that we'll get to everyone, but thank you all for your thoughtful questions and comments.
Jordan has had his hand up for quite some time.
Yes, I think that Jordan had his hand up after some of these folks put in Stack. So sorry, I've been trying to monitor, but thank you. Okay, so we'll go with Sil. First, can we talk about establishing specific goals and guardrails for this effort? Is the main goal equal to defund ICE, or is there more? How long is a general strike intended to last? Timelines are helpful for planning purposes. What other actions can be considered, such as slow tax movement? We all defer paying taxes until goals are met, ? What other needs and networks exist that need to be put in place? Networks for childcare, networks for street medic training, networks for keeping each other fed. It sounds like the migrant community has a good communication model, and can we build on existing networks and structures? That was kind of one big question. Do you want me to keep going?
I'm just going to give a very quick answer to a very good question, very pressing question, and one that actually you just have to keep echoing that question. And I'm going to defer to the previous answer that I said, which is that ultimately, like, a tax strike is a great idea. It's an enormously helpful way that people can sort of be able to contribute to one labor effort without all of the attention on that lever. But in order to organize a tax strike, if you're thinking about the kind of what does General Strike US say the percentage of the US workforce it would need to strike is 3%? It's got 3%. Yeah, whatever. It says needs 3% for a tax strike. Think of how much you would need in order for that to be effective. But the truth is that, like, a tax strike may well be effective. A rent strike may be extremely effective, especially in somewhere like Vermont where rents are so historically high. But in order to do that, like, a rent strike is almost impossible to organize without strong tenants unions, and it's all or tenant associations, and it's almost impossible to organize without neighborhood councils. So, but am I suggesting that that's where we put our effort? Yes, I think like any local organizing is good, but the key word there is organizing. I think, like, folks being able to communicate successfully is just a 100% precondition that doesn't exist in Vermont yet in order to build those solidarity strikes. And then also, in terms of specific goals and guardrails, just speaking as somebody who, I think a lot of us maybe are very invested in disestablishing capitalism. Beyond ICE out, I think we also maybe want the police out. I don't think we want our Black brothers and sisters shot in the street any more than we want our immigrant brothers shot in the street. So ICE out is a rallying cry for us, for sure. But my demand for a general strike would be very different from maybe some of the people who came to the rally. And right now, something that I would encourage as an organizing practice is the in show 8 situation we find where there's this really undefined call for what a general strike is actually somewhat of an advantage in being able to bring forward, like, a really multivalent and multivocal response to that. And it allows multiple organizations to remain being able to, kind of tilt the scale and push people towards a strong anti-capitalist message. So we have a really, really vast array in Vermont of unions that have extremely political memberships and leaderships and ones that don't. And right now, I think this is a great time for us to be talking about demands, but there's no rush. I think it's great that the general strike in Vermont hasn't crystallized to that level, but when it does, it must. And as soon as we have decided that we are going to occupy Industrial Avenue, we're going to have a weekend in which all workers are striking, in which there's a particular shop that's maybe striking particularly, and specifically all migrant farm workers are are stepping out and we're going to have a full fund ready to support them. And then we will remove Industrial Avenue ICE Center. That will be a great solid demand. And there's nothing wrong with that either. I'm sorry, that was kind of a long. If you want to finish out the stack, and then I will pass it to you, Joel.
We might not be able to finish out the stack.
That is fine, yeah.
But it's a yeah. Some folks are saying, you know, coalition, envisioning coalition, including labor unions, faith leaders, community leaders of various organizations. And I know that we have our May Day Strong Coalition. Okay, but the next, which I think Jordan spoke to in the chat, but the next question is, in a general strike, who is the target of action? If we want ICE out, the target should be ICE and politicians, or when we want ICE out, is the focus to reduce our employers' capacity to fulfill their purpose more than profits? So I feel like that is a little bit similar to kind of what we just touched on, kind of what are our demands. I'm gonna read one more maybe. Okay, well, let's see, maybe Jordan, do you wanna go ahead and speak?
No, yes, I'll keep this one short. I'm currently engaged in some conversations with some folks within the Vermont May Day Strong Coalition who are concerned about getting the word out of our demonstrations and other related events. And we are well aware of the fact that it's a challenge for folks who live far in the boonies, whether in the Northeast Kingdom, Central Vermont, and Southern Vermont. And from what we have discussed, we have determined that it may be worthwhile to mobilize our local labor councils to pick up this role, or perhaps to establish local collectives that can take up this responsibility of moving the messages down the line from our folks in Burlington and Montpelier.
Thank you, Jordan.
We're still engaged in these conversations and also building the necessary technical infrastructure to make this happen. It's still a work in progress. As soon as we learn, I would imagine that the PSL will be amongst the first to share.
Thanks, Jordan. Okay, we're gonna go to Theo next in the room.
Hey everybody, Theo, he, him, Wieland. Yeah, the first question from the stack, if I recall correctly, was about what can workers in the helping professions do during a general strike? And I just want to bring this question back up because I think it's so vital to the moment that we're in. It's no accident that over the last, let's say, 70 years, as the billionaires relocated production abroad, to China and Vietnam, elsewhere, that the labor movement moved increasingly into jobs that could not be relocated abroad, such as nursing and healthcare workers and the caring industries, nonprofit workers. And I think a lot of us in this room belong to unions or know friends that are in that situation. So I think like this question is key. And Vivon brought up the question of like, yeah, a rent strike would be great, but 10% of renters are absolutely not in tenants unions. So like, what are the arsenals that we have right now? We have 10% of workers across America that are in labor unions. So, like 10 million workers. And disproportionately, those are healthcare workers. So figuring out this question is probably really important for the coming months. And I don't have an answer, but I would like to talk to all of you about what you think. And what I would propose is that we do something similar to the Seattle general strike of 1919, when you had, over 100 unions run the city. And when workers ran Seattle, they thought to themselves, how do we want Seattle to be run? Like instead of just running Seattle for profits, for imperialism, for the logic of the bosses, for domination and coercion, like what kind of society would we want? And it wasn't a utopia, of course. You're living under like the siege of a strike, but it's my understanding that they let ambulances through and they continued to take care of people. And so I guess what I would propose to all of you is that our North Star should always be class struggle. And the class struggle poses the question of who runs society and how do we want society to be run. I think most people in America want healthcare. They want people to be taken care of. We don't want money spent on invading Palestine, or just these terrible things that are happening in the world. And so I think there's ways for healthcare workers to contribute to the general strike that doesn't immediately just leave the most vulnerable dead or like in grave danger. A number of the aspects of the healthcare system are totally profit oriented, and those could be potentially stopped for a few days or a few weeks, depending on what they are. And there might be other vital functions of the healthcare system that need to continue.
Awesome. Thank you, Theo. I think that we will probably end there. And thank you guys all on Zoom for your patience and your thoughtful questions. I'm sorry if we couldn't get to you. And then I'll hand it off to Joel to close us out.
Yeah, thanks for all the good questions and all the insights from all you union organizers. Y'all remember the movie A Bug's Life? The evil grasshopper goes up and says, "You let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up. Those puny little ants outnumber us 100-1. If they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life." Of course, that doesn't really sound like grasshoppers. That sounds like a billionaire closed room meeting. Their way of life is buying yachts, starting new wars, all that. So we have to organize, get coworkers, neighbors, anyone with decency to stand up. The ruling class doesn't want us to talk about this. Obviously, Drew's union has been like, shut up. And we gotta speak out. We gotta be loud about this stuff. Whether it's opposing genocide or these kidnappings across our streets. We have to get to work. Vermont, we know how to take care of each other. When we've had flooding, we've come together as communities and fed everyone, helped everyone get out of these tough times. We got great mutual aid organizations that we can build upon. There's a lot of risks when striking, but when we're all together, we will lessen those risks. So we have some stuff coming up that y'all should be interested. We got a migrant justice rapid response training for ICE sightings on the 10th of February at 6 p.m. That's at 179 South Winooski. And I'll leave us with words of our comrade on the ground in Minneapolis, still connecting unions, faith groups, and rank and file workers. Was there like a video for that or no? All right.
Sure. I saw also in the chat somebody plugged Worker Circle. That somebody who's in Worker Circle involved told me if this is right. It's every Thursday second and fourth Wednesday of the month. Second and fourth Wednesday of the month that's at 6 p.m. At Migrant Justice, not at the soda plant anymore. Thank you. That's okay. Great. So if you're a rank and file worker or you're trying to get unionized, you're just trying to understand more as where you stand as a worker, please hit them up. And I also just because it came up of healthcare, you guys know about Peter Shumlin and stuff and Vermont Workers Center. I encourage anybody to sort of, in terms of the general get involved pitch, is that I saw a lot of ideas in the chat about childcare and efforts like that. And I would just sort of encourage folks to hold their ideas tight in their head and not let them float away from them in this meeting. And there are organizations like Vermont Worker Center, which has done an incredible job of doing outreach with people about making universal health care real. I'm talking about one specific comment in there. I would encourage you to get in contact with them on Worker Center's website, on Migrant Justice website. If you click the contact us, you'll be able to talk to an organizer pretty easily. And those ideas are helpful. I'm not going to subject Migrant Justice to that. They have a lot of things to filter out, but please, hit us up as well. And I think what you're pointing to. Oh yeah, and then and then next Sunday there's an info session of sort of what's next out of the Minneapolis surge. Sunday Migrant Justice, 2 p.m. Yeah, Migrant Justice, very popular building. If anybody wants to make an announcement to the room, I think we're going to close the Zoom. But I kind of caught your eye as if you might wanted to say something. Okay, nice. Okay, okay. Well, thank you all.